All right, we're just cruising. Labor of love, the laws in Deuteronomy. Let's keep going, you guys. But let me remind you of two passages that I think will be important for us to have underlying the specific laws that we look at today. There was one passage that I pointed out when we were there at the beginning, here, right at the launch of Moses' covenant sermons. So Moses is preaching the Torah here to the second generation before they go into the land. And his opening sermon about how they should keep the terms of the covenant, it gave what I think is one of the most convenient little summaries of what the purpose of all these laws are. You're about to read hundreds of laws. Remember, it's going to get easy to get lost in the details or whatever, get lost looking at the trees. So don't forget the shape of the forest. That's what these sermons are about. And there's one passage that's been immensely helpful for me, and it's this one here in chapter 4. Where Moses says, "Look, see, I have taught you decrees and laws." He's alluding to everything that's come before and that he's about to work through again. As the Lord, Yahweh, my God, commanded me, so that you may follow them in the land you are entering to take possession of. Observe them carefully, for this will show your wisdom and understanding to the nations, who will hear about all of these decrees and say, "Surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people." So let's just pause right there. If you immerse yourself in the laws of the Torah, one of the effects is that you will become what kind of person and what kind of people together. He says it twice. Right? So wise and understanding. So, this is surprising to us, and this is why I think this is a cool passage, is because the effect of thinking about these laws and the value that underlies all of them is wisdom. Have I taught you the Hebrew word for wisdom before? Maybe I have, but let's just do it again. And because it forces you to clear your throat in the morning, which is great. Chokhmah. And this is why, because it has two chs right in a row. Say it with me. Yeah, you got it. If there isn't any spittle, you're not doing it right. There's got to be spittle. So chokhmah. And chokhmah there's whole books of the Hebrew Bible, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job, that are dedicated to exploring the biblical vision of wisdom, which has as much. So yes, it has to do with a degree of knowledge, but you notice that wisdom is a distinct word from just understanding, which is primarily a mental reality. So wisdom truly is a practical, experiential know-how. Wisdom, whenever artisans, like all the guys who made the tabernacle and so on, they're called wise. They're said to have chokhmah, which isn't just about, like, I know how to do it. It's the knowledge of a craftsman, which is this practical skill. So I think in English we have a word for this called skill. Or know-how, which isn't just about knowing, but it's that you know. So, in other words, if you immerse yourselves in the laws, they give you a skill base for how to think through and navigate life situations. I think that's the basic idea here. And so Moses says, this is what the laws do. And then he goes on, the other part of this key passage here. He says, what other nation is so great as to have their gods near them, the way Yahweh our God is near us whenever we pray to him? He's alluding to the fact that he is in their midst in the tabernacle. And what other nation is so great as to have such righteous decrees and laws as this body of laws? So that's the other concept, which is righteous. And does anybody remember the Hebrew word for righteous? Tzedek. Gold star. Tzedek, which is at its core, it's used in judicial law, like you're the one who's in the right, or you are vindicated, or that kind of thing. But at its core, it's about right relationships, and specifically equity in relationships. And so these are the two words that Moses associates with Torah. Skill in navigating day-to-day situations in life that you just go, whoa, that works. Life works better for these people. And life works better because one of their primary values is having right, equitable relationships in their midst. Okay, so the reason I'm doing this one is because we still have a little ways to go in the laws, and it's just good to remember at least how Moses frames why these laws are important for these people. And then for us as Christians and 21st century readers, we don't live as a part of this ethnic covenant people of ancient Israel. We're not agrarian farmers living we just don't live there. And so the laws, then, you can't just plop them into the 21st century. But what we do is discern the underlying wisdom of right relationships that's being pursued in all of these laws. And there's immense wisdom for us in that. So that's just a reminder, just big picture. I'll do it probably once more before we emerge out of the forest. But chapter 26, the laws will end, and we'll transition into the last round of covenant sermons. We're getting there, you guys. I'm just encouraging you. We're really getting there. So, with all that said, we're going to look at a number of laws about rebellious children, what you're supposed to do with somebody's body who's been executed, your neighbor's ox, how you sow your field, and then a number of laws about sex outside of marriage. Holy cow. Let's go for it. Deuteronomy 21, and we're looking at verse 18. Let's start our day with a law about a rebellious son, shall we? It's a pretty short law. Let's say a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother. He will not listen to them when they discipline him. His father and mother shall take hold of him and bring him to the elders at the gate of his town. They shall say to the elders, "This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey. NIV has, he is a profligate." Any other translations? Glutton, yes. The glutton and a drunkard, profligate and a drunkard. So glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his town shall stone him to death. You must purge the evil from among you. All Israel will hear of it and fear. Okay, wow, that's intense. So first things first. What's going on? What's going on here? There's some cultural details that I think, again, will frame all of this. Just like when, the captive woman and you clip her nails and shave her and that kind of shave her head, and we're absolutely horrified. But then in cultural setting, you see how it actually is a step forward and it's the law that protects the interests of this woman, as we saw last week. There is something similar going on here. It's just on a first read, you're just like, oh my gosh, what on earth is going on here? So, first of all, are we talking about a naughty child? Definitely not. Like, just let's make that super clear. We're not talking about a naughty child. So, my 3-year-old does not listen, and I'm like, he doesn't deserve to die. You know, that's not at all what's going to happen here. So, let's see, and part of this is, I guess this works in English too, though. So Hebrew has a word for child. It's the word yeled. Then it has a word for young man, which is the word na'ar. And so child can go well into adolescence. A na'ar kind of begins at adolescence, but then can go into your 20s. That's the range of na'ar. And then I suppose just like in English, the word son in Hebrew, it's the word ben. It's where our name Ben comes from in English. And it doesn't specify age at all. It's just not. So you can have, I'm my father's son, but I'm in my 30s, but my 3-year-old is also my son. So son has to do with your relational status, not with age. So when we say son, this isn't about naughty child. This is someone who is also enough of age to be brought into some kind of civil lawsuit before the elders of the gate. You guys with me here? I mean, you're bringing him to the elders of the gate. In other words, and so what are the elders of the gate, what do they care if you have a naughty toddler or something like that? Like that's, you deal with that within your own family. So you're bringing them to the elders, because what is the elders' area of oversight, and what are they looking out for? So think of it that way. They're looking out for the well-being of the whole community. So we're talking about a son who is at least of age enough that his behavior isn't just dangerous to the family, it's actually undermining the well-being of the entire community. So they're taking it outside the family. That's the whole point. So maybe, think of a situation, so I've never thought of this before, but one of the key guys at Skate Church who was most responsible for me becoming a Christian, he got married about 2 years after I became a Christian. And then after about 6 months of being married, his whole alternate life came out, like his alternate life of years of sleeping around with lots of different women and drug abuse and so on. And then he just bailed, and he just totally went crazy, just totally crazy, and got addicted to meth. And his parents actually had to, what do you call that? His parents had to take legal action to keep a restraining order, and he can't ever come to our home. He can't be around us anymore because he was endangering his parents and his brother by all of the dangerous stuff he was a part of through drug dealing and so on. So that's the kind of scenario that we're talking about here. He's gone off the rails. He's become a danger not just to the family, but to the whole community, and that's why we're involving the elders here. Does that frame a little different? And can you see that there? Why involve the elders? What do they have to do with how you raise discipline your kids? But the moment that your son comes of age, that he's actually a threat to the whole community. Okay. Now, here's what's interesting. So look what they say to the elders. They say, first of all, he's stubborn and rebellious. I wanted to show you a couple other ways. So Jeremiah picks up on the language of this law in a passage where he is accusing Israel of a number of different things. And look at how he frames it. Look at the language that he uses. He borrows language right from this law right here. So he says, "Announce this to the descendants of Jacob. Proclaim it in Judah. Hear this, you foolish and senseless people, who have eyes but do not see, who have ears but do not hear." Does this line ring a bell from Jesus' teaching? He uses the reverse phrase that he's picked up from the prophets. Isaiah uses this image too. Jesus says, if you have ears, listen. And I think that's because he's convinced from the prophets that not everybody actually has ears. Or if they do, they don't use them. So he says, should you not fear me, declares Yahweh. Should you not tremble in my presence? I made the sand a boundary for the sea, an everlasting barrier it cannot cross. Waves roll, they don't prevail. They roar, they cannot cross. But these people have stubborn and rebellious hearts. He uses the exact same words that's from this law right here in Deuteronomy 21. Isn't it interesting? And they're not the most common words. And stubborn, they're not uncommon words, but used as a pair is very rare. It's not common at all. And so I think Jeremiah is specifically using the wording of this law, which means that he is depicting the whole people of Israel as what? As the rebellious adult child that's now a threat to everyone around them. And so he goes on and frames it in terms of their idolatry and social injustice and so on. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about here. So that's the first thing they say about the son. He's stubborn and rebellious. He won't obey. And what's the second thing that marks this adult son's behavior? He's a glutton and a drunkard. Now, can you think of another time somebody's ever accused of being a glutton and a drunkard? Oh, yes. the person that I follow. Right? Yeah. So Jesus, he's responding to his critics. And he's talking about how the religious leaders of Jerusalem rejected John the Baptist. And he says, these are red letters, so apparently I should pay more attention to them than the black letters. "Truly I tell you, among those born of women, there has not risen anyone greater than John the Baptist." So John the Baptist played this unique role in the coming of the kingdom of God. But now that Messiah is here, whoever is least in the kingdom is greater than he. He was a precursor. The reality here is here that John was simply pointing to. So he goes on to talk about John the Baptist has been announcing the kingdom, and people have been using it for all their own purposes and so on. Jesus talks about that this is like a generation of people who they think Jesus ought to dance to their tune of what it means for him to be the Messiah. So he says, "To what can I compare you? You're like children sitting in a marketplace saying, 'Hey, dance.' This is such a great scene. We played the pipe for you, and you didn't dance. We sang a dirge, and you didn't mourn." So in other words, he's saying, you all have a tune that you think I'm supposed to be dancing to, and I'm clearly not, and now you're critiquing me for it, instead of listening to what I'm trying to actually tell you. And then this is the important paragraph. He says, "John came neither eating nor drinking." Well, he did eat, kind of. What did he eat? Right? He ate insects and wild honey. And he's way out in the desert, and they think, dude, he's a freak. right? He's demonized. He's under the influence of a demon. Who in their right mind would act like that? So that's John the Baptist. And then here I am, Jesus says, eating and drinking, and they say, here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners, but wisdom will be proved right by their deeds. So once again, this phrase right here, that Jesus, so he's quoting the kinds of things that he knows people are saying about him. And so glutton and drunkard isn't just, in this, in an Israelite setting, isn't simply just that he's a man of excess or he's out of control. It's lifting a phrase from right here, from this law about the rebellious son. And if people are saying these kinds of things about him, what does this mean about the critique or the accusations being made about him? It's not just that he's reckless, it's that he's a threat. It's that he's actually undermining the well-being of the whole community. He knows that people are beginning to see him, some are beginning to see him as being like this rebellious son who's a threat to the whole community. So we can understand, I think, the gravity of what's going on here by understanding these two other places where this law gets cited, or the language of the law gets quoted. So, if the whole community is being threatened by the recklessness of this one, I think adult young man, the idea is to put him to death and purge the evil from among them. And that everybody hears and is like, oh, holy cow, I don't want to be like that. So that's severe. I suppose, are we surprised at this point? I mean, are we surprised at the severity of Deuteronomy if you've been going through these laws? No. And I was thinking about this. There's going to be a couple other laws that are going to bother us this morning. And I think I was thinking, like, what does this boil down to? And I think one way to say it is like this. For Israel, the core value underlying this is the well-being of the community. Actually, I'll say it this way, of the covenant community. So this is a society that exists because they've been rescued out of slavery together, and they've entered into this mutual covenant agreement as the people of Yahweh. What's holding their society together? What's the glue? And it's simply this, that Yahweh rescued them and made a covenant with them, said, you're my people, your identity is defined by becoming a people shaped by my instruction. And so that's the core value. Like, that's what is to be protected at all costs, or else the whole thing just becomes unglued. And I think, in our setting, we just have a different set of core values. Like, the idea of your word and your oath to a community of people being the highest value, and that overrides almost any of your own personal decisions or desires. That's just an utterly foreign concept to us as Westerners. So however you want to say it, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, you can say self-determination of the individual or something like that. And that's not necessarily individual, let me spell that right. Because we still, I think, have this concept, at least with our nuclear families, right? With our small family units. Don't abandon your family, you stick with them. You have an annoying you have an annoying sister or whatever. And it maybe extends to your weird uncle, maybe, in American culture, but you invite him to the thing anyway because he's your uncle, for goodness sakes, But some of us don't even have loyalty to our aunts and uncles either, It's just mom and dad and your siblings, maybe. And so I think that's why we have these rub us the wrong way, is because it's a totally different set of core values. And so the life of this young man is considered of less value than the well-being and health and flourishing of the whole covenant community. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily, it's just different. Whether it's better, I'll leave you to think about that. But I do think that there is a wisdom, that there's a chokhmah and a tzedek at work in the worldview underneath these laws that we would do really well to learn from and pay attention to. Well, there you go. I'll pitch it to you. Verse 22. This is completely different world. Let's say there's somebody guilty of a capital offense, so they're put to death. Okay. And let's say that person's corpse or body is hung on a tree. You must not leave his body on that tree overnight. Be sure to bury him that same day, because anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. You must not desecrate the land Yahweh, your God, is giving you as an inheritance. And that's the law. That's the law. So a few things here. First of all, is this commanding that you hang people on trees who have been executed? Is this commanding that you hang people on trees? No. So it's saying when there's a capital offense and someone's executed, which there's a handful of extreme circumstances when you do that in this community. And let's also say that that person's corpse is hung up on a tree. In other words, all this law is doing is it's assuming that this is a practice that some people might do. And this practice was widely practiced in the ancient Near East for lots of different reasons. So this is somebody who's already executed, and they're hung on a tree as a deterrent, as some kind of public shaming to let everyone know what they did. It's like hanging people in the Wild West or something like that, you know. So what this law is trying to do is it's trying to minimize or address or keep it from doing something that would be utterly destructive or offensive or something. And so that whole point here is, don't leave it there forever. It's there for a day, and then you bury it. And this is really the key idea here, is that in the biblical tradition, the remains of people shouldn't be left neglected. There's something, really what gets underneath this is about the inherent value of human beings. And not just human beings like when we're breathing, but even after we've died. There's something still sacred about a human being. And so the remains, even if the remains here are hung on a tree as some kind of warning or public shaming ritual, the remains still have this sacred quality to them. So you bury them, you don't let the birds and the animals pick it apart or something like that. Be sure to bury them that same day, and you don't desecrate the land. But notice this interesting line right here. Anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. This is such a strange line. What on earth does that mean? Well, presumably, if somebody has done something to break one of the laws that in the Torah requires execution or capital punishment. There's not very many, but there are a few. So if someone's being publicly shamed in their execution, it's because they're a flagrant and maybe like the rebellious son or something like that. They're a threat, they're an outlaw, whatever. They're undermining the well-being of the whole community, and therefore they're under God's curse because they're trying to undermine the law, and they're trying to undermine the right relationships and the tzedek at work in the community. That seems to be what it means. Therefore, they're under God's curse, and how they're dying is a sign of that in some way. There you go. There you go. Now, here's what's really interesting is someone who's executed and hung on a tree. Ring any bells, right? Ring any bells at all? Yeah, it's very interesting. So, of course, this law gets picked up by Paul the Apostle. And Paul sees, here we go. Let's just read a good Pauline paragraph right here, which is dense and hard to understand, as a lot of what Paul writes is, but that's what makes him awesome. So he says, all who rely on the works of Torah are under a curse. As it is written, and he quotes from the Torah here, cursed is everyone who doesn't continue in doing everything written in the book of the Torah. So, his whole point is you try and follow the laws of the Torah and give it your best shot. You'll likely fail along the way. And if you fail along the way, you show yourself unable to live according to the way God's called human beings to live. And for Israel, to disobey Torah is to put yourself under the curse of Yahweh's justice, bringing justice on you. So he says, listen, man, nobody who relies on the Torah is justified. And actually the word he's using is a word connected to this whole concept of righteous, which means right relationship. So his whole point is that simply obeying the laws of the Torah doesn't, by that fact, put you in right relationship with God. No, dude, read the stories about Abraham and read the prophet Habakkuk. The righteous live by faith in a trust relationship with God. The law isn't based on faith. On the contrary, it says the person who does these things will live by them. So, Messiah, Christ, he redeemed us from the curse of the Torah by becoming a curse for us. For it is written in Deuteronomy 21, verse 23, cursed is everyone who is hung on a pole. That's not helpful. Pole is fine. I guess it's fine. But you'll see, here we go. Everybody else translates tree. Tree, 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 tree. And that's the word, just the simple word that he uses. Now, if you're being hung on a tree, what's the idea? You're being hung, maybe it's an actual tree, or it's a tree, the long trunk of a tree that's become a pole, whatever. And then he goes on, he redeemed us from the curse of the Torah in order that the blessing of Abraham might come to the Gentiles through Jesus, so that by faith we receive the promise of the Spirit. So this has to do with big picture here. Paul sees this little, so I don't think Paul sees this as like a prophecy of the crucifixion or something like that. But he is saying, listen, even Jesus himself was accused of being a lawbreaker. But ironically and surprisingly, what Jesus was doing was, as the Messiah, taking the curse of death on behalf of all of Israel and its stubborn and rebellious rejection of the Torah, and he literally became under God's curse, so to speak, where he experienced on Israel's behalf the effect and the consequences of its disobedience of the Torah. And he became a curse so that through his resurrection we might have the blessing of Abraham that comes through faith and the promise of the Spirit and so on. Isn't this interesting that Paul quotes this little line here? And so he uses it. So this is just one example of bad things happening to you if you disobey the Torah. But Paul uses this language here of being hung on a tree And so he sees it as the perfect way, giving us the perfect language to describe what's happening on the cross, is Jesus becomes a curse so that we receive blessing. There you go. Paul, thank you, Paul. Deuteronomy 22. Let's keep going, or else we're never going to make it through the laws of Deuteronomy. These are great. We'll like these. Deuteronomy 22. Let's say you see your brother's ox or sheep straying, wandering. Hey, don't ignore it. No, be sure to take it back to him. Now, if the brother doesn't live near you, or let's say you don't know who he is, i.e. whose donkey, or ox this belongs to, take it home with you. Keep it until he comes looking for it. So let's say it's a distant relative or it's a neighbor and you're not sure how you're related to him. Keep it, give it back to him. Do the same. If you find your brother's donkey or his cloak or anything else he loses, don't ignore it. If you see your brother's donkey or his ox fallen on the road, don't ignore it. Help him get it to its feet. And there you go. That's the law. Or it's actually three variations on the law. What gets repeated in each time? Don't ignore it. Don't ignore it. So what's the principle here? The principle here, maybe this is a law written for conflict avoiders. like myself. You guys know what I'm talking about? There's something going wrong in a public space and you want to crawl into a cave. Right? So for some of us, that's our temperament. You just want to go away and make it stop or something. And then there are others who just whoa, they just want to get involved. Right? They just inherently don't ignore it. They feel the need to get entangled in this whole thing. Man, I have a good friend like that. He lives in Wisconsin. He gets himself into more trouble. And he's not wise in what he gets himself involved in sometimes, but it's always from a good motivation, which is, hey, that's screwed up, or that's not right the way that just happened. I'm going to get involved in this, whatever. So the idea here, in this case, is so you look out for your neighbor, yeah, but you also look out for your neighbor's stuff, their donkey or their ox. It seems to me, I think this is precisely the kind of law that Jesus is getting at when he says the golden rule. In everything, do to others what you would have them do to you. This sums up the Torah and the prophets. So it's not just about your personal relationships, but there's also 1,001 other ways where you look out or you look out for the well-being or you love your neighbor in a way that you would want them to do for you. Because if you lost your ox, you would want your neighbor to look out for your ox too. That's the basic idea here. So even though we've had rebellious son, that's an extreme case, but there's a similar core value here, which is I'm a part of a larger community, in this case here, of people that we've made covenant to be the people of Yahweh together. And so your well-being is absolutely my concern. And the well-being of your ox is absolutely my concern. And that's a core value. None of this, let them fend for themselves and make their own way kind of thing. Verse 5. A woman must not wear men's clothing, nor a man wear women's clothing, for Yahweh your God detests anyone who does this. Well, okay. So I guess women should have never started wearing jeans or pants or something like that. The idea here. Is fashion at the root of this? Is this about fashion? This has nothing to do with fashion. Okay, so and particularly the last phrase in this line about God detesting anyone who does this. So this word detest, it's a word specifically used. Well, how is it used? If you look at how it's used, its most common usage is to describe violations or distortions in a marriage covenant or in human sexuality. And so, Leviticus 18, the main chapter in the Torah, it's a whole chapter about who you're not supposed to have sex with. That's the purpose of this chapter. But it's speaking it's expressing a core assumption about the purpose, the high and sacred purpose of human sexuality. And the contrast is, don't do as they do in Egypt, where you used to live, and don't do as they do in Canaan, where you're going. Don't follow their practices, keep my decrees, and so on. And then the whole chapter is framed with who you don't have sex with, and one of the most the terms used to describe this are either dishonor, so you're publicly shaming, or that is wicked, or this language of defiling, profaning, or this language of detestable. So, in other words, this is the language that gets used when we're talking about practices connected to sexual intercourse that violates the purpose, God's purpose for human sexuality. And so I think that helps us frame the context of whatever is going on with cross-dressing. It's connected to sexual activity, not fashion. So let's just pause and say we live in Portland. And so even, there might be a sense in which, I don't know. The issues here are so extremely complex that I don't know if this is the moment to get embroiled in them. But there is something in the biblical tradition, and it continues right on into the New Testament, and Paul has to deal with it as he's dealing with the church at Corinth as well, that there is something beautiful and amazing about gender, and that gender realities, while they can be distorted and they can be turned into social constructs that can become oppressive or distorted in some way, there is something inherently biologically different about males and females, and there's something beautiful and amazing about that. And the biblical tradition calls us to honor that. Now, different cultural expressions might honor that in different ways, and I think we need to be open to that. But the whole point is that there's something to be honored and recognized, and not act as if those differences aren't there, and that how dress and sexuality can be distorted to blur those boundaries, that doesn't honor the Creator. I think that's my way of making a basic statement underneath it. As we get on into the series in Matthew, the number of places where Jesus talks about sex, gender, and sexuality, we'll have to full on go for it. That's kind of, by committing yourself to do what we're doing with Matthew for the next year and a half, it means we're also committing to working through all of the passages that are amazing and awesome, and then all of the passages that you would typically avoid if you were doing a topical series, right? And so, but Jesus will force us to have to really think about some difficult things together as a church. And they're related to the topics raised by this law as well. Let's keep going. Deuteronomy 22:6. Let's say you come across a bird's nest beside the road. in a tree, or maybe on the ground. And the mother bird, is sitting on the young or on the eggs. Don't take the mother with the young. You can take the young, but be sure to let the mother go so that it may go well with you and you may have long life. So, so we could start this over here. There's some core values at work here. So some of you might be hoping, this is my impulse too, it's like, well, it kind of spoiled the point. Take the young? Come on, the young, they're helpless, or whatever the idea. So what's being protected here? Who's being protected? Mother bird. So not the young or the eggs, but the mother bird. So what role does the mother bird have that's different than the young or the eggs? So producing eggs, right? Life giver. So there's something about. So clearly this is a little case study right here, and there's some sort of principle of right relationships with the resources and life in the environment, the ecological system around me. But there's also a wisdom underneath this too. If you over hunt or over harvest a species of animal, what's going to happen within a few generations? You won't have that animal anymore. I don't. So we're with the Sierra Club people trying to get your signatures on Hawthorne every time you go there, right? You know this, right? So you know Sierra Club? It's a great organization, trying to protect endangered species, among other things. So I think that's all I can think. This is very similar to protecting the fruit trees, as we saw last week. These are life-giving resources. So, let them be, for goodness sakes. Like, they have this incredible place in the community of life and in the ecological system of generating life. So let them be, for goodness sakes. Yeah, they produce eggs, so take the eggs. They're good. Mom she'll lay 3 eggs a day or whatever. But don't take mom, because then you won't have any eggs. So notice also that let mom go, because she's the life giver. She's creator of new life. And so that it may go well with whom? With you. So it's also recognizing that there's this inherent connection between you and your well-being and respecting the value and life of these animals who are also making life around you. There you go. Right next to the law about cross-dressing. This is the world of Deuteronomy. Let's keep going. Verse 8. When you build a new house, make a parapet around your roof so that you may not bring the guilt of bloodshed on your house if someone falls from your roof. Oh, you know what I didn't look up, but I will do it right here. Because we mostly know what these look like. Ancient Israelite houses. Thank goodness for Google Maps, right? Here we go. This will do. So we're talking about flat roofed structures, and the roof is accessible either by a stairway or a ladder, and it's where you do a lot of stuff. You hang out there, you eat meals up there, you dry laundry, you dry figs up there, whatever. And so parapets are these little things right here. I don't know what else to call them because they're called parapets. But they're these little raised pieces here. It's sort of like building a little fence on your roof so that people don't fall off of your roof accidentally. That's what this law is about. Build a fence on your roof so people don't fall off. And you don't bring the guilt of bloodshed on your house. So, of course, it would be unintentional if someone fell off the roof of your house, but could you have prevented it? Yeah, you could have. You could have just, spent 200 more bucks and built the parapet, for goodness sakes. And then you don't. So this, it seems to me, is connected back to that thing about don't ignore or don't neglect the well-being of others in your community, either by actively doing something and looking out for their ox, or here, by actually taking thought to things that could go wrong and preventing those as a way of loving your neighbor. Yes, you see the principle there. Let's at least finish the next couple here. Don't plant two kinds of seeds in your vineyard. This might be the most random collection that we've come across so far. Don't plant two kinds of seeds in your vineyard. If you do, not only the crops you plant, but the fruit of the vineyard will be defiled. Don't plow with an ox and a donkey yoked together. Apparently they don't get along. Don't wear clothes made of wool and linen woven together. Make tassels on the four corners of the cloak that you wear. Well then. So we had these laws all put together in one other place, in Leviticus 19, about keeping different kinds of animals, different kinds of seeds, different kinds of clothing separate. And you guys, there are a million explanations of these little laws right here. Some people think that these had some kind of cultural associations with Canaanite practices or something, and therefore the Israelites were meant to be distinct, and so these are symbolic ways. There's nothing morally at stake here, but it is a symbolic way that Israel was to be distinct. Some people think that there is something connected to the idea of different kinds. So just like the thing about cross-dressing or so on, we're respecting the inherent distinctions and differences that God's built into creation, and therefore don't mix those. It's a way of honoring God's intention. We could probably think of some exceptions that wouldn't seem like they're... I'm probably wearing polycotton in some form right now. You probably are too. So am I going against God's will by wearing polycotton? I don't think so. I mean, I just really don't think so. If I were an Israelite, I think I would be. But I'm not an Israelite. And on this particular point, I'm thankful for that, because polycotton is really comfortable. So I think this is probably some mix of the symbolic, be different than the Canaanites, and then a worldview where you, in all these different ways, you're honoring the distinctions of difference that God has woven into the creation itself. How you guys doing? Talk about a grab bag of laws. I'm trying to make them as interesting as I possibly can. And we didn't even get to sex outside of marriage this week, so we'll talk about that next week. We'll keep going. How you guys doing? We're doing it, you guys. The laws in Deuteronomy. I mean, where else are you going to do this with a group of people, really? So let me close it with a word of prayer. And on a serious note, I think the big takeaway for us is really thinking about the value system underlying these laws, some of which are very strange, but some of which I think we really need to pay attention to and listen to and see the principle of wisdom that's underneath it. And recognize that Jesus saw wisdom here, and he boiled it down to loving your neighbor as yourself. As a way of getting at what's going on in all of these too. So let me close with a word of prayer.